Hi, everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. Welcome to our session today, this Saturday. How are you, Håkan?
Yeah, I'm really good. How are you, Jonah?
I'm great. We have a not very, but the sun is up today and some snow. And how about you? I know that you are in Sweden, not in
Yeah,
Norway today.
actually, today I'm in Stockholm here, so it's actually 7 + 7 or +8. No
Okay.
snow.
Yeah,
It's a nice,
snow. We
nice
got
day. Yeah.
I think we got almost half meter snow, but it's a bit icy. Yeah, so welcome everyone to those that are watching us live, recorded in all our streams on C Sharp Corner. Thank you for joining us. And we have got an interesting session coming up today. A special guest from Microsoft with the topic of DAB API for .NET. But before we start, let me just have the honor to introduce my co-community leader, Håkan Silvernagel. Håkan is the community leader of Azure User Group Sweden. He is also Microsoft MVP for AI technologies. He is working as an AI specialist at Miles in Oslo, Norway. And he's a Microsoft certified trainer, very active in the .NET user group in Oslo, AI 42, and AI communities in the Nordics. So it's an honor to collaborate with Håkan and host this session, community session today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonah. And I'm also very proud here to be able to introduce Jonah Anderson, who is the founder of our user group. She is a Microsoft Azure MVP. She is also a Microsoft certified trainer. She is a mentor and international public speaker, and she is also a book author and has published a book on Azure for O'Reilly. And in her daily job, she works as a senior Azure consultant at Solidify.
Thank you for the presentation, Håkan. Yes, and welcome to the new watchers or attendees of our community. But before we start, let me just share to everyone that in our community we follow a code of conduct. So we are expecting everyone, the members, ourselves, to be nice and friendly. Listen with purpose and be thoughtful, be respectful, seek to understand and not criticize. Be curious and open to share your ideas during our live chat or even our after sessions or discussions. Be inclusive in your comments and questions. And you do have feedback or requests for improvements in the community, feel free to reach out to me and Håkan on LinkedIn. And then we will be having a fika also, Håkan, right? To those that can join us.
Yeah, that's right. So if you can join us here after our session, you will be able to meet our speaker Jerry to ask him questions on a Zoom meeting. So just
Yes.
scan this QR code to find the link for that.
All right. Great. Okay.
So now we are very proud and very happy to introduce our guest today. So welcome, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, is for sure. It's a neat opportunity to be able to talk to honestly, every community of developers I can, to be able to talk about Data API Builder, just partly because it's such an excellent tool, but also because it answers a lot of questions and meets a lot of needs of people that and in the past, Microsoft has always been delivering tooling and delivering different things for the developer experience to be easier. And it's neat to be part of that kind of legacy of things that are going on. I am a product manager here in SQL Server. And more specifically, I'm on a team dedicated to just developer experience. So it's a neat team to be on because we get to respond to the day-to-day kind of interactions with developers to be able to understand what it is that or even hear about what it is that makes their life easier, or what would make their life easier, and try to build out those special little pieces that make sure that they're, it's just kind of like death by a million cuts sometimes when the developer experience is bad. And the goal is to make that developer experience as positive as possible and easy. There's definitely a business motivation, right? The easier it is to use the tooling and the products, the more people are quick to adopt it. And that's also the kind of philosophy around data API builder as we move forward, that this is meant to be that, that kind of adoption friction that every tool has, to reduce that as much as possible, both for DAB, but make that also for all the databases that are in Azure. So data API builder is a tool that sits on every database that is in Azure. That by itself made it a little bit more complicated, but it was a really aggressive story to be able to say that we're going to make it so that we build a tool that works for everything. Took a lot of extra engineering, but also works for everything that isn't in Azure as well. So if you have, like, for example, if you have Postgres or SQL Server and it is running on-prem or anything like that, you could take this as an open source engine for you and make it work. And it's been a really exciting thing. And a lot of engineering work has happened for the last about 2.5 years ago is when it was born, just as an idea. And we're just a month and a half away from general availability. So it's the perfect time to talk to you guys about it. And I think as you see it unfold and see what it does, you'll be as excited as I am.
Yes, I think I myself is excited for it as well, and I look forward to learn and share it to my developer colleagues in my projects as well. But thank you so much for like getting up early. I know that you're not you're in a different time zone. You're in the U.S. and Davide couldn't make it because of the time zone difference. But I'm glad that he could make it. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. It's my
Yes.
pleasure to be here. It's worth getting up for, no doubt about it, just because I get to talk about it.
We do everything for the community, and you know how it is like. Also,
Yeah,
yes. All
that's
right.
exactly right. All right, well,
Yes.
let me just talk about it at a high level so that we can at
Mm,
least understand what it is. Um, and also know that it was a big need. There are a lot of other tools in the marketplace that do similar things to this, but certainly not the exact same thing. And as we move forward, you'll kind of see that some of you may have experienced or may have come across other tools that are like this, um, and and we have too. I mean, I know about them as well, and it is a nice kind of community of tooling as well. The work that's being done here is very innovative, and you'll see what I mean. All right, so um,
yes. All
this is
right.
this is our DAB. Uh, this is our DAB logo. It's a little
Yeah.
database
All
with a
right.
hat on it, and the whole idea is DAB is just takes any database and gives it an API and gives it an API layer. The whole idea is that more and more, especially with the larger customers inside Microsoft, they have a lot of data, usually spread out across multiple databases, often the result of acquisitions that have happened in their company, or maybe some mergers that have happened as well, and they find themselves needing to have some sort of integration of all that data, or they want to be able to sell that in a kind of data marketplace, so that they become a clearinghouse of data that they have that's special, but they want to expose it. And so this idea of data APIs on top of your data to stitch applications together, but also be able to stitch different parts of data together, all of that is certainly nothing new, but we see the demand for it growing really strong as we see the overall gravity of data in as a topic itself just becoming so large. So, for example, a
Yes.
we find that our customer data is doubling every few years now, and but also the data sources are doubling as well, because they realize the data is so valuable and so important to their different tooling, or to their different solutions, but also to their overall business model. And most companies now don't even think themselves as a company that does a thing like an airline, for example. They don't even think of themselves as an airline. Instead, they think of themselves as a technology company that does airline things, for example. And so that just results in so much data being extended. So that's where Data
Okay.
API Builder is a beautiful piece. And
Exciting already.
it is, yeah.
Yes.
It,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But let me see. Did you want to introduce Jerry in properly, Håkan, before he kickstarts the
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
presentation? I'm excited already. Go
yeah,
ahead.
we can do that. So as Jerry has already mentioned here, he is working as a product manager at Microsoft on the Azure Data Platform, and he focuses on SQL Developer Experience. And he has more than 2 decades of experience in developing, designing, and delivering software. And he has experience both of speaking at small, tiny venues and also in giant launch events. And one interesting factor is that he is also a professor at computer science at Colorado Christian University in
Mhm.
Denver. And he also trains in public speaking here. So we're very, very happy to have you here with us, Jerry.
Thank you, Elkin. I
That's
appreciate that.
yes, yeah. Okay, all right. Now you can rock the stage, and we're gonna leave you. All right. Yes, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. As a professor of computer science, it makes me appreciate things that are simple and easy to kind of adopt and get into, because it's already difficult to stay up with the never-ending changes of our industry and the growth of all the different technologies. So yeah, if I'm going to contribute to it, I want to contribute to it if I can in the easiest possible way, and give as much developer kind of candy and value back as I can. So it's really great. And so thank you for having me here. Sorry for getting started too soon, right? I'm always so eager to talk about it. And great. Yeah, that's great. By the way, I've been at Microsoft now for 12 years. I started as a developer evangelist, speaking publicly for 8.5 years, traveling and speaking only at conferences. It's very possible that some of you maybe have seen me before. My name, or at least my face or voice, look or sound familiar. I've had lots of different podcasts and YouTube video channels for a while, that all through Microsoft, always because of some sort of product that I'm involved with, or just general evangelism towards developers. And that often focuses on things like UI design or UX, C Sharp and SQL Server, of course. But back in the day when things were very exciting around XAML and the Windows Phone and all the things that were happening there, and there was so much energy around just UI and all of the things. I was kind of one of the primary voices, and so if I do sound or look familiar, that could perhaps be one of the reasons. But it's great to be over at SQL Server. This has been a dream of mine for a long time to be part of this team, and to be able to talk about this is really great. And so I'll try and do everything as live as I can today. So we'll do demos. I'm not going to do demos inside PowerPoint, and so give me just a little bit of mercy if something takes a little longer than it should, or maybe goes wrong. Hopefully it doesn't. But let me start with, you're building an application. You are coming up with an architecture that makes your application work. You are starting with a client. You build a client in whatever technology you want. This certainly is not a discussion around .NET. In fact, this has nothing to do with .NET. If you don't have a solution that is .NET oriented, perfect. If you do, perfect. It doesn't make it easier to adapt DAB if you're a .NET, if you have a .NET solution or not. Not at all. If you use C Sharp, DAB isn't easier. It's just easy. And if everything is JavaScript, everything is Java, everything's Python, everything's Go, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, because that's one of the nice things about having a data API layer in the first place. All you do is interact with it as JSON. And so it's just HTTP and JSON over it. So it makes it nice and easy to think about from a conceptual point of view. So you might have a client, just like we have on screen here, and you might have a database. Hopefully you have a database. And whatever your database is, it could be Postgres, could be MySQL, could be CosmosDB. Hopefully it's SQL Server, just because SQL Server is better than it's ever been. And the number of special features that we have been engineering for SQL that make the developer experience overall through the database incredible are just going higher and higher. Like it really is neat to be able to talk about SQL to a developer audience today, because the sorts of things that it can do compared to before, right? Before, it was just a database that the people who really interacted with the database were the DBA, and the story of SQL, and basically all databases as we move forward into the future, are the people who interact with the database are more likely to be the developer now, because we wear different hats. We have different skill sets that are required of us, and basically the economy and the industry have changed, and we are changing with it. And so it's really great. So whichever database you have, hopefully it's SQL Server, in between your client and your database, you're going to introduce some sort of an API layer. Now, this isn't required. There are a lot of clients that talk directly to the database, and that's just the way they were designed. But that's far, far, far more less common than it used to be. You introduce this API layer so that when you speak to the database, you can have things isolated as far as credentials. You can have technology isolated as far as things like caching or mapping your data. And all of that happens in a layer that is outside of your client to make sure that, one, that any client gets the same value and doesn't have to understand those technologies, but perhaps more importantly, that your client can't skip those technologies either. And so if you have one client, you know that you give it to it. If a second emerges, uses the same API, it gets the same value and same benefits. Okay, so this is as simple as it gets. Where does DAB kind of come into play here? DAB is in the middle here. It builds the API itself, and it does it not through code generation, but it is an engine that is like through code. Um, well, it's more like through configuration, like code figuration, you might even say, where I provide it with the information for where my database is, how to access my database, and what it looks like, which entities in my database matter, how they, for example, are related, the projection or mapping of columns, and the permissions that I want. So all the things along those lines are given to it as a JSON file, and which is great, right? Because once again, part of the adoption and friction for developers is figuring out which languages it's supposed to be. Is it supposed to be YAML? Is it supposed to be C#? Is it supposed to be JavaScript? None of that is really even part of this discussion. We just give it a JSON file, which is kind of, hopefully, if you also would agree that this is language independent, right? So once you give it this sort of JSON file, then the engine simply configures itself and runs. And you have tons of architectural options as we move forward and architectural choices that you can use. Let me start by saying the tool itself is built for the developer, although it is 100% meant for production and it's meant to deliver data through a data API. The features for the developer experience are paramount here because you could add your own, but I don't want anything like that to happen. Instead, I want you as the developer to feel like this tool is just natively catering to the needs that you have. And so let me just start by saying one of the things we have is Open API. You can see it on the screen. Open API is our, well, it's just that standard to be able to look at and describe an API as a JavaScript object. And so it is a standard, and there's lots of tooling out there that if you have a rich and fully developed open API declaration of your API layer, then it's very easy to build clients for it as well. And so if you go in and there's a JavaScript library for it, almost guaranteed, that can look at a open API specification and pull back and create for you all the classes that you might need, or just at least all the interaction code that you would need for your API, and especially specifically your REST API. So also for REST testing, very standard now, of course, Swagger. Hopefully you've seen Swagger before, and that just allows you to do all of the things that you want to or you would expect to do for your endpoints. So you don't have to have, I mean, of course you could, but you don't have to have Postman or maybe Insomnia as the client that you would use to interact with your endpoints. But yet those tools are also supported completely, of course. And then finally, as far as database, as far as developer tooling, you get GraphQL testing through we use Hot Chocolate internally to expose the graph endpoint, and then you use Banana Cake Pop as the testing tool. So where Swagger is the testing tool that developers use for REST, Banana Cake Pop is the testing tool that developers use for GraphQL. So Data API Builder exposes your data as a data API that is REST, but it also exposes it as GraphQL. And in fact, let me say it another way. It is GraphQL or REST, or it's GraphQL and REST, or it's just GraphQL, just REST. It's really just kind of up to you, or a little bit of both. It really is up to you and how you want to expose your data. We don't tell you to go one way or another, and so you get to make all those choices on your own. All right, let's go a little further here. I have a simple database example here that is a Star Trek database. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I have 3 daughters. They all know about Star Trek, I can tell you, and all the pieces. Summer was Comic-Con here in Denver. And so we went to Denver Comic-Con together, and we all went as an away team. They're all in uniform. It's like one of those things that's a dream come true for a dad. I think his wife and his 3 daughters and everybody, they have a little bit of an argument about who gets to be Uhura and who gets to be Nurse Chapel, and on we go. So it's a lot of fun. But let me just start by talking about the CLI. We have a command line interface to interact with this that is intended to make it a little bit easier, if possible, to work with DAB. And so let me start by just showing some files that I've prepared in advance, just to let you kind of look at and see where we're headed. So you can kind of feel out what the CLI experience is, but also what the capabilities are as well. So let me actually just begin by saying I'm going to have a database that looks like this. It's nothing difficult. It just shows all the characters that are in Star Trek, all of the actors that play them, and the different species that those characters are. I mean, you could have built this database. Hopefully that when you look at it, it seems very simplistic. That's what it's meant to be. It's just kind of, what if I wanted to know all the different characters and who played them? And so I have this in my database. I have a SQL file that just goes through and creates all those tables for me and creates the relationships between them, and then inserts all of these, all of their information. It's just the demo, right? I mean, that's the idea. Like, what do you get? I could sell bicycles. I could do all the things that everybody does. Why not do the things that I like? So that's what I'm building, this type of schema. But let me just start by what you would do inside DAB. So here I am in DAB. Let me move this out of the way. And let me start with line 15, just so you can see. So I have made it so that this is just a file that I can run over and over again. But sorry for the scrolling here. There we go. So line 15, well, let me say with line 13 first deletes the JSON file. So the JSON file is this is the configuration file that I'll pass to the engine to make it work. So line 13 just deletes it. That's all. And then in line 15, this is me using the Data API Builder CLI, all of the CLI or command line commands that help build this JSON file for me. I don't have to do this. I can just go in and start typing. I can build my own JSON file from scratch, but sometimes, especially when JSON files start getting larger, it's easier to make a mistake or not have a closing curly bracket or miss a comma, which is probably the easiest thing to forget in a JSON file. And so as I'm building things out, I could do everything inside a UI of my choice, or I could do it here in the CLI, if nothing else, just to get me started. It is really nice, though, to use the CLI because the CLI knows the structure and it just does it nice and quickly. And so let me just show you what I've done. And in line 17 here, for example, I am well, no, let's go up to 15 because this is where the fun is. So I'll say that the database that I'm about to create is MSSQL. So that's Microsoft SQL. That could mean it's a SQL on-prem, or it could mean that it's SQL like Azure SQL Database, which is SQL Server in Azure. And then what my connection string is, you can see it uses an environment variable. So that's really important. I can put my connection string right here raw. I don't have to use an environment variable. But if I do, this is the way I would do it. And in fact, let me show you in the folder that I have a .env file. So if you're a Node developer, you're already familiar probably with .env files, just a place for me to construct my environment variables that when I run the engine, they are put into the process scope of the environment for environment variables, right? They're injected in the environment variable. So when my process ends, they're also deleted. But it also means that no other process can access those environment variables. So it keeps it nice and safe. So let me go back to my interaction here. So I'm creating SQL Server. And let me know if this is too small. But I'll assume it's not, so I don't have to make it too big. Here's my connection string, and then I'll go through and I'll decide what my authorization is going to be. So we support EasyAuth, we support JOT tokens, we support Azure Active Directory, which has been renamed to Azure Intra ID. All of those you can use the way you would expect to, and service principals and on it goes. And anything that honestly is supported by a standard connection string, we also support as well. So the whole idea is we don't say you have to use Azure Active Directory or Intra ID. You can use whatever fits your model, whatever architectural direction that you're going. But if you do use Active Directory or something along those lines, it certainly is easy, and that's the goal too, right? That's the goal too. All right, and certainly a lot of developers or companies still use username and password. That is certainly not dead by a long shot, like by a long shot. All right, so the rest is just information about authorization. But all of that could actually be removed, right? This is not a required part of initializing it. Instead, I could just make it so here it is. I'm just connecting to my database, and here's my connection string. So it can be as simple as you want. And in line 17, I start talking about the different tables that I have. So in this case, it's the author table. And so you'll remember I have an author and a character table, and author and character. And so here they are. I'm just saying here are all the different tables I want to expose in my API, because I could have in my database, um, I could have hundreds of tables, and I don't want to expose all of them. I only want to expose a few of them. And so this is the easiest way for me to limit it down, but also say what I want them to be called when you interact with them, what I want the REST endpoint to look like, what I want the graph entity to look like as well, right? So let me just show you that I have I say it's an actor, and I say that it's named actor. This is just a internal moniker that I can use to refer to it from this point forward, and especially as we go down, and I'll talk about relationships, and then which config file it's in. And so mine is called Star Trek.json, and that's the reason it's a little fun like that. What the source is, and so this points to the table, but DAB doesn't have to point to a table. It can point to a table, or it can point to a view. It can also point to a stored procedure. So it's really up to you what you want to use inside it. We also support CosmosDB, so it can also point to a container and use NoSQL as its data source and interact with it. DAB also supports multi-data sources, which means I could point to SQL Server and CosmosDB, and I could have a combination result that comes back when I'm using GraphQL as either as both relational data and non-relational data, all in a single query. And if we just kind of chase that idea further, I could have multi-data sources where maybe it's two SQL servers, one SQL server on-prem, one SQL server that's in the cloud, and all of a sudden a single API request returns data that is a blend of cloud data and on-prem data. So very exciting. All right, let's go stay with the basics, Jerry. All right, so now what the type is, this says it's a table, not a view, not a stored procedure. And then I start explaining this table because two things. One, I could infer the structure of the table because I know how to query a database and query SQL Server's metadata. However, it might make more sense for you to make it so that I interact with another field as the primary key. I don't know your database, you do know it. You might actually have a database that doesn't have any of the primary key constraints configured because that's the database you inherited and you don't have any choice. So we don't require that all of those constraints be in place. Instead, we just allow for all of your constraints to be defined right here by you. So you can have custom implementation of how your database interacts, including the relationships we'll see later. So that's really nice. And by the way, a view doesn't have a primary key. So this is really handy too. So I can say what the key field is, even if you select a view. Then I say what the endpoint is going to look like when it's the actor and what its different permissions are. So here I can say, here I'm saying that for the anonymous user that is not authenticated in DAB, I'll go ahead and just give it a star here. And then for all the fields that I want to include, I can also exclude fields, which is really terrific as well. So it just means I don't have to include them all, and I can map them with a key value looking pair. So I can say if you don't like to return it as an ID, or you can return it as key, or you can return it as primary key, or you can return it as customer ID, whatever it makes sense to you. You can map it and reproject all of the data as it's coming through, as it's coming back through your data API or through DAB, right? So DAB is your data API. Other things I could have configured are things like caching to make sure that the data itself has caching, or to make sure your API takes its telemetry that we've instrumented it all throughout, so that you have advanced telemetry that you could also ship off to a central location like Application Insights, for example, so that you could query it later or monitor it real time. So that's another set of things that you can configure too. Now on line 22, those are also tables, character species. However, those are not just normal tables. Those are your cross-reference tables or your linking tables that go so you can have a many-to-many relationship. I'll show those, but I don't necessarily want those exposed. And so, but I have to have them first of all, so I can do what's on line 25, where I say, now I am going to create a relationship that says, oh, I see, series is related to character because a character is on a specific series. Or maybe character is related to species. So I know that, for example, Spock is a one-to-many relationship because he is both human and he's Vulcan, for example. And so you have the same sort of simple relationship. So we support one to many, many to one to one, and many to many, all the things that you would expect from normal set operations inside a database. So we don't have any sort of limitation when it comes to that either. All right, so this is me and the CLI, just so you could see what it might look like. And the result is the JSON file. And so I've spent almost more time on the CLI than I would have expected, to be honest. And this is the way the JSON file would look. We have a kind of a run. Well, I'll start by saying we have the data source section, and the data source section says this is my database and how to get to it, and anything extra that's specific to that type of database. Some databases have different extra pieces. For example, whether or not the context is that is to say. Your users' claims as they come in for authentication get passed down to SQL or not, right? So that's a normal feature of SQL. You can just set it to true, and now all of a sudden you have access to that. So we support then user claims, so that we have policies that you can set inside Data API Builder to say certain users, based on their claims, we can do interrogation and set up policy to say they do or don't have access, or we can add that as part of the predicates for your where clause, and that gets shipped down. Or we can, and these aren't just ors, but or you can set the session context so that you can have even more granular control down on the SQL level. So it's really nice to have tons of security. I've turned all the security off for this demo, obviously, to make it as easy as possible. But the next section is the runtime section, and this is basically where I enable or disable REST, I enable or disable Graph, and set up all of my authentication policies. And so that's the reason you can see right here. Obviously, I could go to the docs, and obviously from the docs, I could interact and build this from scratch, or it could just, I mean, all of this is a lot. There's a lot of details, easy to get wrong. That's why I use the command line interface to do it, so I don't get it right or wrong. And then here I have all of my entities built out, and you can see now I have, same as before, this is what was built by that CLI command. It created the actor node and then indicated what table it was, the type of table, the key fields, what I was going to do for a graph, whether or not graph is turned on individually for each entity, so I could turn them off if I wanted to, and REST, and then the permissions, the graph. I could set up a caching on the individual entity level as well. We just came out with version 0.10. And so by the time we get to 0.12, that will be promoted or graduate into version 1. So we're just right around the corner from version 1 going into GA. So that's very exciting. All right, so now that you kind of see the idea of this, let me scroll down and show you what a relationship looks like as well, right? So here's where I define the relationship inside the entity. And I say this is the actor. So the actor then has a mini cardinality into character. And I could specify then what the different primary keys and how they relate to each other. All of that then gets mapped automatically by the engine, and I just let the engine take it from there. It will then generate dynamically a schema for GraphQL and allow me to interact with the GraphQL endpoint then through any of the GraphQL tools you would hope that were already there. A schema is great because it gives me an IntelliSense experience. So it allows me to say something dot, and I can see what's coming next, and keep just typing it. And it makes it so that as I'm building out my query, it's easier and easier for me to do it because it guides me along the way. All right, so I have my browser open here. And whoop, I just minimized it by mistake. And so this is the Azure portal, and I just want to build this out all the way. In fact, let me show you what I'm going to do conceptually by talking about static web apps. So again, this is just DAB, right? Where you have DAB in between. It's going to create it. It's going to put it in a container. We have a regular MCR container that you feed it in the config file, and then as its entry point, and then from there, boom, you have DAB running, and you have an HTTPS endpoint or port exposed, and then you have a REST or GraphQL endpoint. And so it's really great, right? But the easiest way to get started by far is using static web apps. Static web apps has integrated a new feature that they call a database connection. Database connection is basically the config file for DAB. And so you go in and you figure all of this out, and it will automatically provision the container. It'll automatically pull down the correct version of DAB, it'll automatically inject all of the configuration information that it needs into DAB for you. Spin it up when you're using it, bring it down when you're not. Static web apps, if you haven't played with them, they are amazing and so easy to use. It's kind of a delight for developers. So I'm going to build this, right? I'm basically just implementing this container, but instead of creating my own container instance somewhere out on the internet, I'll let static web apps do it for me. And when you see it, you'll be like, that is one easy thing to do, no doubt about it. Let me start by saying that any type of SQL is fine. I'll just create a standard one. In fact, for the sake of time, I may not even create it. Let me show you a demo I did yesterday, and it might actually make more sense to you to show it from a research group point of view. So I have this false demo that I've created. And this is it that you would need. I would need, obviously, a database. A database requires a server. So those two things, a database server and the database inside it, and then a static web app account, right? So if I go into my static, so here they are, by the way. So you can see at the bottom, or sorry, in the middle here is the SQL server. That's just the server, which is a logical server. Obviously, you don't get a server in Azure anymore. You just really get the database, and the server then acts as metadata across multiple databases. And so great. So I have my server, and of course I have my database server. And let me just go, or not my database that's in that server. And let me go in and show you what's there. It's nothing special. You're going to see it's just the schema of this Star Trek demo. And so this is the database. I go in and I go to the query editor. I might need to make a quick change for the IP address if my IP address changed since yesterday. Let me just see. You all have experienced the same thing, I am sure. By the way, that's my email address, jnixon@microsoft.com, or it's jerry.nixon@microsoft.com, whichever is easy for you. So if you have a question, in a month, and you're like, oh, I could really ask him a question, feel 100% open and free to send me an email. Let me go in real quick and just add my IP address. That's the problem right now. And I'll add right there, add my IP and save it. Then when I go back, it will give me permission. There you go. Doesn't take too long to do that. Here's the query editor. I'll connect again. Hopefully it'll be nice and snappy. Hopefully it'll be nice and snappy. And if it's not, it's okay. I don't need to go into it, to be honest. I just wanted to be able to show you this. Okay, good. It did. All right, great. All right. So now if I just open up the tables, here are all those tables. Hopefully they at least seem familiar to you, right? I have actor, character, species. Those are all the ones, and I already have the sample data injected. I took that giant SQL file that we looked at the very beginning, and I just ran it, and it filled all those. So if I select star from actor, do actor, it's nice to have a little dialogue, right? That I can run queries in the browser. I have to worry about whether or not I have SQL Server Management Studio installed or not, or if the connection works and all the other pieces. All right, so you can see there's William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself. There's Leonard Nimoy, that's going to be Spock, and all the others, right? 1931, right? So wow, these things are, time flies. All right, so now let me back up again, back to, in this case, the resource group, so I can see the three different things. And there we go. And now I want to go into a static web app. And I want to say, when you create a static web app, the order of things matters, right? Because it just makes it easier. So, and this is the only thing that matters. One, you need to have a repository already built in GitHub. So just have a simple repository. You don't upload things to a static web app. That's not the way it works. Instead, you simply interact with one of your repositories, and that repository is linked to static web apps. So as you make changes in your repository, they automatically fire GitHub actions that push them up into static web apps. The reason I say you want to have that first is because if you have it first, as you're creating your static web app, it automatically establishes that connection and builds out those actions for you. And it saves you a lot of hassle, right? It's just really nice how beautiful that developer experience is. You just need to know it needs to begin on this side, that is the GitHub side, and then build it out from there. You can also have it in DevOps, and there are other options too, but it's awfully easy when you do it in GitHub. So I have already created my GitHub. Let me show you that because I have it over here in another browser. So I'll pull that down and just show you that in a GitHub repository for static web apps, the only thing you really need is one file. However, static web apps also needs a root. So I have an HTML file that I'll navigate to it so you can see what it looks like. It says hello, and it's got my buddy Travis in there. And so that's all it is. You just have to have an HTML file that just sits there and waits for you. And it's just one of those things that's really nice to get static web apps working. Obviously, you would create a subfolder here and create a Blazor application that runs in the browser, or you would create your own Node application or just static content that you have. That's what static web apps are for and what makes them really awesome, so that you can just drop your content in here and it's ready to go. It's different than an app service, right? This isn't running .NET on the server or anything like that. This is, everything's going to be browser based. This is still a static web app, but it's neat that it's so easy to interact with. And you can see I have this .github workflows. And so if I go up here, this YAML workflow that goes through the process of taking any changes that I have and pushing them up in the static web apps was built for me automatically. I didn't write any of this. It was injected for me. Obviously, I could come in and make changes to it, but I'm not going to need to. All right, so here's my folder. And so the README, of course, you know that a repository is automatically initialized with a README. I guess that's there. I mean, you can see it doesn't have much in it, but that's not really a required file. And then I go into, and the naming matters here, and the docs have all of this documented out for you. SWA, that's static web apps -db -configuration. And if I go in, there's a file that says static web app.database.config.json. And that's just the name. Just know there are names that are configuration, that are, they are, what it starts with a C. They are, they're, they are not, it's not required. It won't cause you to have it, but it is a convention. There we go. Finally thought of it. It is a convention-based file name that you have to have so that when static web apps runs, it finds it correctly, right? That's the idea. And anyway, here it is. I'll scroll through this just real quickly. There's nothing in here that's special because everything is what we already went through in the JSON configuration file that's meant for DAB. I just take everything I have locally when I'm running DAB, and I just put it up into this file. And with the exception of, I make sure this line 5 happens. So let me see if I can zoom in just a little so it's easy to read. And this is actually the same as what I was showing you before. It still runs locally when I say dab space start, but I want to make sure that I'm using my-connection-string. Right? That's important. So that's the way that static web apps injects into environment variable. This is always the name of the environment variable for your connection string. And so this is the file. The only thing I've got, I just wanted to show you how easy it was to create this repository. And the only thing you really need is just kind of, I guess you don't really need the initialization string or the initialization file of this index HTML, but it's nice because then when you go to the root endpoint for that, you don't get an error. And you have this connection setup, which is just the same file that you would have running locally as well, with a different connection string that you specify where I'm going to show you right now. So I've got the 3 things. SQL Server, you can ignore. The database, which we just saw, just has a normal database, no extra configuration. And then I go into my static web app, which when I created it, the only extra thing I did was make sure I pointed it to the correct GitHub repository. And I noticed right here, so this is it, my static web app. You can see it's a static web app overview page. And I go down and I go into settings, which that little expansion is new. That wasn't there just yesterday. It seems crazy. And you can see the database connection preview, right? That's what hasn't always been there. The database connection and there's a little star. That's cool. And then it goes up in my favorites. I'm learning with you. All right, very cool. All right, so I'll go in and I'll click database connection, and it's in preview right now, but it works beautifully. It only does one thing. It asks me what my connection string is or what my different parameters are to get to my database. I save it, and then it does right here. Right here where it says false SQL Server database resource, that would give me an error. It would say file not found if that specially named configuration file was not in my repository, which it is, but it would tell me there. And then if I go over to view details, it lays out all of the connection information for the correct SQL Server. Make sure that when you create a database, oh boy, this is, yeah, this, let me show you a tip of a lifetime right here, because this is a heartache when you forget this one checkbox that makes it so that you can't use your SQL Server. And this isn't anything special that you can only do for this. This is true with every resource that you do in Azure. If I go into my database and I go up into set server firewall, it's the same place. I should have shown you there, but it's this checkbox at the very bottom when you scroll all the way down, and it says allow Azure services and resources to access the server. If you don't have that checked, nothing in Azure can talk to your SQL server. It's brutal, and so just make sure it's checked. It's a error that's a real pain to be able to debug. Real pain to be able to debug. So now I'll come in. I'm back to my my web app, or my static web app. And if I wanted to delete this for whatever reason, this is where I would go and unlink it as well. But this is the only thing I have to do that's special. I would come in, I would create a brand new one. I would give it the information about my SQL Server, the connection string information as well, and I'm done. Everything is finished. It has what it needs to put into the environment variable that I'm going to read from my connection file. Now, when I call to it, it will automatically spin up that container in the background, and it saves me a lot of well, it just saves me a lot. It's the easiest way to do it for sure. If I go up to overview, it'll tell me the URL here. And so let me copy this URL. And well, I don't even need to copy it. I'll just click it up here. Right. And so hello, Travis Falls. That's the root file. So this is just the static web app doing what it's supposed to do. And if I then go up here and I say data API, and nothing else, and I just say that moment. So we're waiting a couple of seconds for this to initialize, and it is now spun up running the container for Data API Builder. And so I now have a Data API on top of my my database, just like that. All I had to do was provide the description inside that JSON file and just then give it to a static web app. The configuration is then injected into the container. The connection string is added to the environment variable, and then the engine just runs. And everything I would have needed to do to get to a REST API. So let's just play around with that for a second. So I would say, for example, /API. And by the way, I want to just point out there's kind of an extra piece to this URL, and that URL says that /data-API/API. And the reason you see that extra little piece is because I'm using a static web app, and static web app has a predefined feature that came along before Data API Builder that uses the /API. Just does, right? And so you can add an Azure function, just like we did, added a container here, or DAB instance, to a static web app really easy. And so that uses /API. So because we couldn't reuse something that was already used, we had to come up with a new one. So we came up with data-API. So there you go. And so you can see it's working, right? You can see everything is coming together here, and I can do things that are kind of OData related. So I could say, for example, select equals, and what are my options? ID and name. I'll just start with name only and say go, and I can, let's see. Sorry, I'm meaning to add a $sign right there. Right, and so now I can go in and I can even tailor the payload that's coming back to me. I can add filters here, so I only get ones that start with an N or things along those lines, or maybe have an ID of a certain value, or an ID that's greater than or less than something. And so that's nice, because that's kind of the OData features that we've enabled. Not all of OData. This is not an OData service at all, but we've taken some of the good ideas that OData has and used those too. Great. All right. So now we've done it. This is the demo of how do I build it out. Well, the hardest part of building it out is configuring and setting up the JSON file. I can run all of that locally on my local CLI, when I could say, for example, let me pull my command line down here just for a second. I'm sitting where all of those files were that I was showing you before, and the DAB CLI, it sits right here. I've got it installed. I say .NET tool install Microsoft Data API Builder, and that will install it for me as a global tool. And that will install it for me so I can use it everywhere and keep it up to date for me. I think if I run, it'll tell me that it's already installed. And but I can update it as well. It pulls it from NuGet for me automatically. And so you have a great experience there too. And then I would just say dab start, and then specifically, I'll point it to my JSON file. -C says the configuration file name. And so I'll say go, and it runs it for me locally here. It'll give me an endpoint where I can go and interact with it here in just a second. There we go. Right. And so it gives me both the HTTP and the HTTPS endpoints. There I would just say /API, and everything starts working locally, and I can interact with it without having it in Azure or anywhere else too. And if I have my own Kubernetes cluster, I have my own whatever it is you run in your containers, then you just pull down the MCR or the Microsoft Certified Repository image of DAB and just run it just like that. There's no license or fee or anything like that as well. And so you can see why this doesn't have anything to do with .NET, right? Because on all I'm doing is calling that. I can use curl. All I'm doing is calling that and getting back JSON. If I deserialize that then into C# classes, that's great. If I use it directly inside the JavaScript, that's great too. Let me see. I have just a minute more, and so let me show you. Let me just show you some architectural options that we have that might make this even more compelling for you. And so I can add an API manager in the mix, which makes total sense. If this is going to be a production level and it's going to be a really important API to you or your company or your customer, please include some sort of API manager. Azure has API manager. It's just called Azure API Manager, and it allows you to do all kinds of important things like payload interrogation, centralized security, extra monitoring and observability as far as telemetry. It allows you also to do versioning and things like that too. So please don't skip this part because it seems a little more complicated. Adding some sort of API manager will give shelf life to the API that you're building. It just makes sense. It also has like denial of service tooling to make sure none of that would happen to it too. Okay, let me also show you more. Let's pretend that just these CRUD operations are not enough for you. You look at it and you're really disappointed because you just have this one extra thing. And you're like, there we go again, 99% of what I need, but not that one extra thing. So I can build that with my own sidecar kind of implementation of giving my own custom function that sits to the side. It's not injected into the container or anything along those lines. You literally are creating that 1% on the side, and we're just saving you the 99% of CRUD writing that you don't want to write. If you feel like the best investment of your time is rewriting and writing all of the CRUD implementation for your data API, you're not thinking straight. Maybe you're paid by the hour, then it makes plenty of sense. But otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. All of the code and source code that you have to introduce into your repository, into your solution to make things work, right? It's a very disappointing situation to be in because all of that code has to be maintained and tested. So you have all these unit tests, and it makes it so your CI/CD pipeline is bigger, and it makes it so your overall build CI/CD pipeline publishing is slower as well, right? All these things that you can just kind of get away from by using a tool like DAB to just basically get rid of all of the code that you would have built for your API layer. Another thing you can do is easily scale it. I can have, because it's container based, I can have as many containers of DAB as I want. All I need is a configuration file for each, pointing to whatever database I want. That'll make it so that your API has a single set of endpoints that feel like they're cohesive, but in all reality, it makes it so that they are um, all separated, just brought together, and they look beautiful. All right, I see a question here, and hi Arnie. DAB is so fluent. I think we'll just leave it at that. No question. Just a comment. DAB is so fluent. You're absolutely right. We'll move on. I'm just teasing. Can we start thinking about replacing widely ORMs? Now, this is a common question that I get, especially in the context of Entity Framework, whether or not this is in competition with Entity Framework. So let me just go back one slide and show that if I were to extend this, well, let me actually go back one more slide. In this case, where I'm going directly to the database through DAB and my client then accesses all of the data through DAB, the need for Entity Framework is very low, right? Very low, because why would I even use Entity Framework? The reality is I would use some other client that interacts with a graph endpoint or interacts with a REST endpoint, something like Kyoto. And I would feel like you could almost remove the NuGet package for Entity Framework. However, as soon as you reach a point where you're like, well, there is that one use case where I do need to interact with the database myself, I'll go ahead and use DAB for the 90 percentile of things I'm going to do. But I do need to do this. Well, how is that custom function going to interact with the database? Is it going to use Entity Framework? Because Entity Framework is awfully nice to use, and so I would be compelled to interact with, to have Entity Framework showing up somewhere in my custom implementations and sidecar along the way. But if you're only using Deb, it definitely sidesteps the requirement to have Entity Framework or any other ORM. All you do is just get back the JSON like you would want today. Just think about the like the Twitter API. You don't need Entity Framework to interact with the Twitter API, and they're never going to let you interact with their database. So if you're always going through an API, you have the answer to your question. There's no need for an ORM because from your client's perspective, there is no database. There's only an endpoint. So there you go. So it's not in competition, of course, with Entity Framework because it still has its place for all those use cases where you do need to talk to the database. This definitely raises other questions, by the way, around like code first Entity Framework and things like that, that a lot of developers really like and love. Okay, so just talking about scaling. So this is nice. I can bring multiple databases together, or I can actually create separate endpoints for the same database. And maybe I do this by like domain-driven design, so that I take the domains and they are individually represented in each of my containers, so that they are isolated depending on the business use, and maybe their performance then is also isolated, so that I can insulate them from one another. That's another possibility too. Or some other way you do it, right? It's just nice to know that something like this is actually possible. Another thing I can do is make it so a single endpoint brings together multiple databases. So now I've just got one container, but I bring multiple databases together, and it's worth at least remembering that those databases don't need to be the same kind. I can point one of them is SQL Server, one of them is MySQL, one of them is Postgres, one of them is CosmosDB, a couple of them, then before, a couple of them maybe are on-prem, a couple of them are in the cloud, wherever you want them to be. And you just handle all of the security in that configuration file. And from the user's perspective, everything just magically works, right? That's really nice. And how much source code have you introduced to your overall solution? One file per endpoint, right? That's really manageable. That's really manageable. All right, see another question here. Thank you for the questions. Authentication mechanism through identity providers supported in DAB. Can DAB support executing stored procedures? The answer is yes. DAB absolutely supports stored procedures. We definitely want that, where you can pass in parameters and get back a specialized result set that allows you to do all of the exotic code that you might want to execute inside your database that maybe doesn't belong inside a view, for example. I mean, accessing a table is direct, and we write all the query for that. Like, I think the first was actually a question: authenticating mechanism supported in DAB. You're asking kind of what they are. So that's going to be Azure Azure Active Directory or Intra ID, as well as JOT tokens that come from other providers. Or anonymous, so with those alone, also Easy Auth, we support Easy Auth as well. That's nice because that's built into static web apps as well, so it makes it really nice to interact with those too. That's the bulk, by the way. Because we support those, we kind of support 90-some% of all the possibilities of how you would interact with it. Anything that's missing from one engineer to another here, that's one of the reasons you have an API manager. Odds are you can implement any missing schema inside an API manager or an app gateway that you introduce to your application. Does it support procedures? Yes. Can DAB propagate CDC changes? It cannot. Not yet, at least. That's partly because CDC doesn't give us the feed that we need to be able to have that. Once all of that's in place, we should be able to see GraphQL subscriptions come as a feature or enhancement to DAB. That's a future thing. It could be a little while before that comes along, but I totally understand what you're asking. We want it to. We definitely do. Can we use DAB? That's a lot of questions in one comment, I will say. Can we use DAB in a data factory as an endpoint? I've never thought to do that before. Why could you not? Yes is the answer. Of course you can. That's a great idea. That's a terrific idea. It's not going to be as efficient as accessing the database directly, but maybe for a security requirement or some sort of infrastructure requirement that's like you're forced to do, you could do it like that. That's a pretty cool idea. Just know pagination is built in. It makes it so that we limit it to 50 records at a time. That's because we don't want to make it overwhelming. We provide the next link in the paging mechanism behind the scenes to make sure that you can still use that in your application. That would be the one thing that could make it tricky to use for Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory supports paging, so it's not like you couldn't do that. It does add one extra piece of sophistication to your pipeline that you might need. So I understand what you're asking. Interesting. That's really interesting, actually. We're talking about bulk load as a feature that we would add to DAB later. I could see a bulk extract. That's fascinating. Great question, by the way. Thank you for doing that. Really quick, I know I've only got a minute or so here. We have in-memory caching. We also have not just in-memory caching, we have all the different authentication. See, I could have had it right here and it would have answered your question too. All the different ways that we can authenticate and read all your claims. That's the important part. Once you have all your claims passed through, once you have all your roles passed through, we can also create policies inside DAB that listens to those roles and claims and prevent you from making a query in the first place or pass that information down to your database to use. We also are fully instrumented, so we have telemetry that you can ship out your logs to application insights, for example. And just so you know, we also support REST and Graph. That's the most important thing, and a differentiator, not just the databases that we support, but the fact that we give you both a REST endpoint and a Graph endpoint. You'll see other tools out there, and they're either limited to just Graph or they're limited to just REST. And sometimes a solution requires a lot of options, and so it's nice that you can have a combination of both. Definitely the easiest way to interact with the data API is through REST, of course. The most elegant and sophisticated way is through GraphQL. And if you've ever tried to create your own GraphQL endpoint and all the resolvers and nested resolvers necessary to make that work, you know that GraphQL is a real pain in the neck. And so for us to do it for you, to just say, hey, now you have it and they're all nested and interrelated, and you just get it for free because you've configured it correctly. That's stinking nice. I mean, if that's not the reason to use DAB, I don't know what. I mean, all these others are reasons to use DAB, but this really is a great reason to use DAB. I forgot what the next slide is. Let me just look real quick. Oh yeah, what a REST endpoint looks like. I'm not going to go into that. That's everything I wanted to show you and kind of give you an idea around. Let me say these important things. One, DAB is free. There's no license. There's no premium edition. There's no special use case where all of a sudden you have to pay for it. Never. You can use it on-prem or you can use it in the cloud. It's completely up to you. You can add this to your application or you can run it in a container. That's up to you too. We don't know how you're going to use it. We don't care how you use it. Just kind of let us know how you're using it. You can go to, let me see if I can give you a couple of resources here. You can go to the repository. You can go to DAB itself. It's funny. The number one link here. Let's see if I can go back. There it is. The number one link is aka ms/dab. That is the repository where DAB is. You can go fork it. It's completely open source. If you want to go to DAB and build out a feature yourself, please don't just do it randomly. Obviously, let us know you're doing it so we don't build it at the same time or something. And just know we love DAB. We are pouring into DAB as well. It's completely and really open source, and it's wide open as far as licensing and reuse. And let me actually do that for you. aka.ms/dab, and go to this is the repository for DAB, and this is what you would see if you were there. And I just want to also show you that under the community section of the README, there is an invitation for you to sign up here and give us your information. All this does is let you join the community so that when we're about to work on a feature, when we're going through some sort of road mapping exercise, we can invite you to be part of that. We have a community stand-up on Azure Developer channel on YouTube. The first Wednesday of every month. You can join us then as well, ask questions, or just kind of see where the product is going. And then what was the most important thing was that it's open source, free. You can contribute to it, and it interacts with the five currently supported databases on the back end. We just added another, so you have SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, CosmosDB, sorry, and we just added support for SQL Data Warehouse inside Synapse, right? So that's a lot of capability sitting at your fingertips, ready to go. So it's really nice. And thank you as just a user group community. As an evangelist in my past for almost 9 years, I've visited user groups all over the world and throughout, of course, Colorado and the United States. And just being able to be part of them, be able to make sure that developers feel that community and support. We all suffer from some kind of imposter syndrome, some sort of like place where we're like, oh, the industry's so overwhelming. I'm so glad that to see that, COVID didn't kill all the user groups and that they're back. Some are hybrid, some aren't, whatever. And to see that the community is starting to kind of come together again because it's required. There's just too much for us to learn. Hopefully you'll find yourself feeling itchy to present something you just learned and contribute back to your own community. And I certainly love to do it myself as well. And so hopefully I'll get to speak to you again about something else, or about when the next version of DAB comes along and the next, family of super hot features that we've added to it as well. Please be part of the DAB community. Sign up if you want to. Try it out. See how easy it is. I'm not making any of this up. There's no smoke and mirrors. It really is one of the coolest things we've had in a long time. Certainly, it is an easy on-ramp to all the databases in Azure Data. That's really our goal, right? We want to make it so it's easy to use all of our databases. But we realize that you could use it yourself and never even talk to us about it. Never use a product that Microsoft even makes. That's totally cool. It's up to you. And we're happy to support that as well, because in all reality, we're kind of in this together. And so having a full-on open source product like this has been really kind of a dream come true for me. And I'm glad to be part of it and glad to kind of share it with you as well. So if there are any questions after this, obviously I'll make myself available. I do want to go back to the resource here just so you can have it where all the documentation is. We're just a couple of months from getting out of public preview so that everything is GA and ready for you to use in production as well. So thanks again for letting me talk, and hopefully you have a great experience with DAB, and let me know about it, please, because I would love to hear from you.
Hey. All right. Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Jerry, for a very passionate and interesting session. I
Yeah.
love how you share about it.
This is what I sound like at 4 a.m. It's absolutely great.
Uh, it's like your coffee kick, sharing about what you helped create.
Yeah, that's
All
exactly
right.
right.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Yes. Thank you so much for the awesome presentation. Definitely, I did start following you on GitHub, and I'm definitely going to listen into the community that you have on the link as well. And thanks to everyone who asked questions. And Jerry will be available to join us in our Zoom meeting if you are able to. So we do have a QR code for that. Let me just share it. So feel free to join us on our short fika through that QR code later if you have more questions to Jerry about dab.net. And the session is recorded. We will be re-sharing it to our channels also later on. Håkan, do you have any last words or final words before we end the stream?
Yeah, maybe. So thank you very much for a very interesting session, Jerry. But maybe you can repeat when. So when is this going GA general availability?
Well, we're on track right now to be May 1st. So just kind of
May
around,
1st.
just around the corner.
Okay. Yeah, we need to spread it out, spread the word before May 1st. That's great. I'm gonna share it to my
Thanks.
colleagues as well. So this is interesting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, appreciate
All
it.
right. Yeah. So yeah, it's time to finalize and end our session. So before we end the session, so we are actually choosing those that ask great questions. I love the questions. Håkan and I, and maybe with the help of Jerry, we will be picking the best technical question, and you will get a copy of my book. I did wrote about data platform technologies there as well, and I wish I could have written about that in that maybe in the next edition. But
Yeah,
yes,
perfect.
yeah, that would be great. And then feel free to join us. And we also are joining Global Azure this year. So if you are someone in the community, regardless of your expertise in public speaking, you have something to share, feel free to submit your session or any ideas for talk on our call for speaker. It's ending on March 17, and we will have our virtual event about any Azure related topics on April the 20th to join the entire communities of Azure globally. And feel free to send that one. We would like to have you. Okay.
Nice.
I think we're good and time to say goodbye. I always feel dramatic when I say goodbye to the community. But see you in our next session coming up in 2 weeks. And next month we will be having an AI themed sessions with Azure. So it will be awesome.
Nice.
All
Nice.
right. Have a great weekend, everyone. From me, Håkan and Jerry.
Mm.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Uh,
Bye.